Highly anticipated hearing on Capitol Hill. Attorney General Sessions set to testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee next hour.
The country's top law enforcement officer could be asked about everything from the Russia investigation to the firing of FBI Director Comey. We're covering all the news happening now.
The fact of the matter is we have millions of people who are losing care, who essentially don't have care because their premiums are so high, the deductibles are so high.
So what are the next steps for Republicans to repeal and replace Obamacare? That question looms large as President Trump meets with 13 GOP senators on the issue ahead of his own health care remarks later today. And Secretary of State Tillerson meets with the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia as the U.S. tries to ease the diplomatic crisis between that oil-rich kingdom and Qatar, home to a giant American military base. It's all happening now. But we begin with a Fox News alert. President Trump set to leave the White House to tout jobs in Wisconsin. This as his attorney general is set to testify about 90 minutes from now to the same Senate committee where James Comey testified last week. Welcome to the second hour of Happening Now. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Heather Childers. The stage set again for a high-stakes showdown, this time when Attorney General Jeff Sessions heads to Capitol Hill to answer questions from Senate Intelligence Committee members that will range from the Russia probe to the firing of James Comey. Meanwhile, the Trump administration, well, they are trying to focus on what they got, or what got the president elected to begin with, job creation and repealing and replacing Obamacare. The president will leave the White House a short time from now to head to Wisconsin to tout those initiatives.
And we have live Fox team coverage. Kevin Corke is at the White House, but we begin with Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge. Catherine.
Well, thank you, John. We are less than 2 hours out from the testimony of the Attorney General Jeff Sessions. He will be speaking in front of the same Senate panel, the Senate Intelligence Committee, where the fired FBI Director James Comey testified last week. And within the last hour, they have concluded the security sweep, which includes the skybox, where I am right now, that overlooks the hearing room, as well as down on the floor, where the Senate panel will hear the questions and the answers from the Attorney General. And to give you a sense of how tightly packed the hearing room is, they have set up a tree for the still photographers to hitch their cameras to in front of the witness desk because there simply is not enough space to accommodate all the photographers at the start of the hearing. And based on the testimony this morning from the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, we're at least getting a sense of the direction the Democrats will take in their questioning of the Attorney General. For one, they'll want to know about his contacts with the Russians during the 2016 election cycle and whether they go beyond the meetings that he has declared in September as well as July of last year. Also, why was it that the FBI director knew in mid-February or had a sense based on the evidence and the intelligence that his boss, the Attorney General, would eventually recuse himself from the Russia case? And what role did the Attorney General play in the firing of James Comey because he had excused himself from all matters Russia-related, and Comey testified to the Senate panel that he believed he was fired over his handling of the Russia probe. And we had a key exchange this morning between the Deputy Attorney General and a senior Republican on the committee about whether the president could fire the special counsel Robert Mueller. Here's that exchange.
Has the president ever discussed with you the appointment of the special counsel or discussed the special counsel in any way?
No, he has not.
And second, if President Trump ordered you to fire the special counsel, what would you do?
Well, Senator, I'm not going to follow any orders unless I believe those are lawful and appropriate orders. Under the regulation, Special Counsel Mueller may be fired only for good cause, and I am required to put that cause in writing. And so that's what I would do. If there were a good cause, I would consider it. If there were not good cause, it wouldn't matter to me what anybody says.
And supporters of the Attorney General Jeff Sessions are emphasizing today that he will be testifying in an open public session, and this will give him a chance for the entire nation to hear his answers to these questions about the Russia case and, in fact, correct the record if that's what's required after Comey's testimony last week. John.
Catherine Herridge on Capitol Hill awaiting that big hearing. Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
And as we continue to wait for that, meantime, President Trump is trying to move forward with his agenda, other things that he wants to talk about. He's heading to Wisconsin to talk about jobs. The president also focusing on health care. He met with Republican senators at a luncheon a short time ago about pushing forward the repeal and replacement of Obamacare. White House correspondent Kevin Corke is live for us at the White House with more on that. Hi, Kevin.
Hey there, Heather. Always nice to talk to you. You're right. Just about everybody here in Washington is wondering what's going to happen on the Hill later this afternoon. But the president is keeping his eyes on two central themes to this White House: jobs and replace and repeal Obamacare. Health care reform, such an important pillar of this White House. And so, yes, this afternoon, as you pointed out, the president welcoming some lawmakers to continue the conversation, trying to come up with a sensible alternative to Obamacare. Meanwhile, much of the rest of Washington anticipating the AG's hearing over on Capitol Hill. The president, in fact, tweeting about the former Attorney General this morning, writing AG Lynch, speaking of Loretta Lynch, the former Attorney General under President Barack Obama, made law enforcement decisions for political purposes, gave Hillary Clinton a free pass and protection, totally illegal. Now, that tweet was obviously an attempt by the president to draw a distinction between what he saw as an overly political Attorney General with his current Attorney General, who has gone so far as to recuse himself from the Russia probe to avoid even the appearance of impropriety.
I think the president's been clear last week in the Rose Garden that he believes that the sooner we can get this addressed and dealt with, that there's been no collusion. He wants this to get investigated as soon as possible and be done with it so he can continue with the business of the American people.
So you heard Sean Spicer there at the very end saying, listen, what the president really wants is to get this thing over with so he can get ahead with the work of the American people. By the way, I think it's somewhat ironic the president will actually be aboard Air Force One. One Attorney General Sessions is testifying at that hearing en route to Wisconsin, where he'll be over in Waukesha talking about the importance of on-the-job training. You may know this, and if the folks at home don't know this is a big story. There are literally hundreds of thousands of jobs that go unfilled each and every year because there simply aren't enough people who are properly trained for it. So the president's going to be talking about that as he makes his way up to the Badger State. Of course, I'll have details in and around that little event over there on Capitol Hill. Back to you.
Just that little event. All right. Thank you so much, Kevin.
You bet.
That little event that can't even fit all the photographers who want to be there. All right, so for more on the Attorney General and his testimony coming up, let's bring in Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief at The Hill. So this is the same committee, as was noted before, that James Comey testified to less than a week ago. I imagine we will hear a very different story from the Attorney General?
I would think so, John, without a doubt. Remember, Sessions wanted this to be in the public domain. He wanted to publicly testify, as Comey did. So I think you're going to see a very different type of story about the interaction Sessions had with Comey and also probably rebutting some of his side of the story. But he's going to have to answer some tough questions about how many times he met with Russian diplomats in 2016. There's been different accounts in the media on that. And why did he recuse himself from the Russia investigation, but then clearly had a role in the firing of James Comey? So it's going to be, I think, some fascinating testimony today.
But are those two things, I'm not sure if mutually exclusive is the term, but he said that he had decided to fire Comey, earlier in the administration, and the fact that, he may have independently reached the decision that Comey needed to be fired, independent of the Russia thing.
Yeah, he could have. Certainly Rosenstein and Sessions were involved, and the president did say at one point it was because of Russia. But Sessions has not publicly answered that question. So how he answers that question, I think he'll also get questions on discussions he's had with the president. That's when I would expect that Sessions would cite executive privilege. He's not going to go into every discussion that he's had with the president on X, Y, and Z. I think, John, it's going to be very interesting to see Republican senators. Are they going to defend Sessions, a former colleague? This is going to be more partisan, I think, than the Comey hearing last week.
Right, and Comey also had that kind of cryptic statement where he said that the FBI knew of reasons that it would be problematic, I think was his term, for Sessions to continue to oversee the Russian investigation, and that's why they just knew he was going to recuse himself. Are we going to get answers to what that's all about today?
I don't know. It remains to be seen, but I can see why Sessions wants to talk about that, because Comey, as you said, cryptically had these things he said about Sessions. I can't talk about this in an open session. So there's a cloud over Sessions that Comey said to the senators, listen, I knew that he was going to have to recuse himself, but why? And what's his account on that? I would imagine that Sessions wants to talk as much as he can publicly, and I think that he won't dodge many questions other than executive privilege, private conversations with the president.
You mentioned about the reception that he'll get from Republican senators. I mean, there was a time when senators of both parties treated each other with a great deal of deference and respect. I guess those days are kind of gone. But, you know, just 5 months ago or so, he was still one of the club of 100. And I just wonder how tough even the Democrats will be on this attorney general.
Well, I mean, they were tough on him during the confirmation process, and most Democrats have opposed most Trump's nominees. And initially, when Sessions was nominated, a lot of people thought, well, he's part of the club, and he'll get a lot of Democratic support. And I think he only got one Democratic vote. That was from Senator Joe Manchin, and the rest of Democrats voted against him. So they didn't want him to head the Justice Department, and I think there's going to be some more effects of that really confrontational nomination and how Trump nominated him going forward into today. So this is, I think you're going to see some fireworks, John.
It is a polarized country politically these days. Bob Cusack from The Hill. Bob, thank you.
Thanks.
And still ahead on Happening Now, Megyn Kelly coming under fire at NBC, why there are calls for her not to air an upcoming interview with Alex Jones. And we are, of course, waiting for Attorney General Jeff Sessions' testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee in the next hour, where he is expected to face questions on the Russia investigation and on the firing of FBI Director James Comey, who testified before the same committee less than a week ago.
Our judgment, as I recall, was that he was very close to and inevitably going to recuse himself for a variety of reasons. We also were aware of facts that I can't discuss in an open setting that would make his continued engagement in a Russia-related investigation problematic.
Sandy Hook's complex because I've had debates where we've devil's advocates said the whole story's true, and then I've had debates where I've said that none of it's true.
When you say parents faked their children's death, people get very angry.
Yeah, well, I know, but they don't get angry about the $500,000 dead Iraqis from the sanctions, or they don't get angry about all the illegals.
That's a dodge.
No, it's not a dodge. The media never covers all the evil wars it's promoted, all the big things.
That doesn't excuse what you did and said about Newtown. You know it.
Here's the difference. I looked at all the angles of Newtown, and I made my statements long before the media even picked up on it.
Well, that is an excerpt from Megyn Kelly's upcoming interview with Alex Jones. Kelly and NBC are now under fire for giving airtime to the radio talk show host who has called the Sandy Hook school shooting a hoax. According to the Wall Street Journal, J.P. Morgan has pulled its advertising from her program. In addition, Kelly will no longer host the Promise Champions Gala, which is an annual benefit for the Sandy Hook Promise Foundation. Let's bring in our Fox News media analyst, Howard Kurtz. Howie?
Well, John, one of the reasons this interview has become so radioactive is that Alex Jones, who has a fiercely loyal following, has embraced a number of conspiracy theories over the years. He's called 9/11 an inside job. He recently apologized for pushing the theory that a pizzeria here in Washington was the locus of a child sex trafficking ring involving Hillary Clinton. And, of course, as you mentioned, calling Sandy Hook not just a hoax but fake, and even saying that some of the grieving parents of the kids who were murdered there were actors. Megyn Kelly has just put out a statement addressing all this. We can put it up on the screen. I find Alex Jones's suggestion that Sandy Hook was a hoax as personally revolting as every other rational person does. It left me and many other Americans asking the very question that prompted this interview. How does Jones, who traffics in these outrageous conspiracy theories, have the respect of the President of the United States and a growing audience of millions? Our goal in sitting down with him was to shine a light, as journalists are supposed to do, on this influential figure. A couple other points, John. Parents in the Sandy Hook community, of course, are heartbroken. One that jumped out at me was the family of Vicky Soto, a teacher who was killed at the Newtown school, saying on Facebook that Alex and his followers have done nothing but make our lives a living hell for the last 4.5 years. And you mentioned J.P. Morgan. pulling the advertising from NBC. The chief marketing officer saying on Twitter that as an advertiser, I'm repulsed that Megyn Kelly would give a second of airtime to someone who says Sandy Hook and Aurora, the Colorado mass shooting, are hoaxes. Why?
John? Yeah, and the interview itself hasn't even aired yet. They just played an excerpt on Sunday night, and already, well, the flames are being fanned here, Howie.
That's what's so striking here about this controversy involving our former Fox News colleague, Megyn Kelly, is that nobody has seen the full interview. And look, what we have here is a classic collision, because one can, you can't not be moved by listening to some of these Sandy Hook parents and how they think that Alex Jones should not get a platform. At the same time, he is somebody who President Trump called after the election to thank him for his role. Trump had gone on his radio show during the campaign. It's not so much that NBC is creating or elevating Alex Jones as it is reflecting the fact that he is an influential guy. But look, over the years, John, as you know, journalists have interviewed murderers and rapists and child molesters. I mean, the anchors interviewed Saddam Hussein, Charles Manson, O.J. Simpson. So this is part of what we do. The test will be, is it an aggressive interview in which the person is pressed to explain, is held to account for some of the outrageous things in this case that he has said, or is it more of a passive interview where you are just kind of giving them a free pass? And I think we can't really answer that question until we see the full interview on her Sunday night magazine show.
Within the past few minutes, Megyn Kelly and NBC News President Andy Lack appeared at an event where they were answering questions and said neither one of them expected the blowback that they are getting from this interview. Does that surprise you that they wouldn't be ready for some of this?
That strikes me as a real miscalculation if that's how they felt, because, you know, Alex Jones is a lightning rod, whether you like him, whether you dislike him. Just by doing the interview, you had to expect there would be all kinds of controversy. Maybe they didn't expect the degree to which the parents at that Newtown Elementary School would get involved, but it really has, you know, obviously it probably drive a lot of people to tune in to her new show, but at the same time, it's got to be uncomfortable to be in the middle of this kind of firestorm where passions are running so high, John.
Yeah. And when the big advertisers like J.P. Morgan start pulling their ads, the networks pay attention.
Indeed.
Howie Kurtz. Howie, thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come in the next hour, starting at 2 p.m., we'll have live coverage as the Attorney General Jeff Sessions faces off some questions. A hearing, you've been hearing about it, before the Senate Intel Committee, expected to talk about his nature of his contract with Russia. Also, this problematic information that Jim Comey claimed to have, such that he knew that Sessions would have to recuse himself from the Russia investigation. Also, his role in the firing of Jim Comey. So we will have all of that coming up at 2 p.m. His hearing expected to start at 2:30. Also, President Trump meeting with GOP leaders, hoping to fulfill his campaign promise to repeal and replace Obamacare. Do Senate Republicans now have a plan to replace it? Our political panel joins us up next.
I'm very hopeful that they're going to get it done and recognize that the system that we have in place right now, maybe people meant well. You know, I don't like to sit around and denigrate people, but the fact of the matter is we have millions of people who are losing.
But he's also expected to talk about health care. And earlier today, he met with Republican senators to talk about their plan for repealing and replacing Obamacare, as GOP members of the House are starting to get impatient.
Now is the time to act for the Senate to move the bill and bring it back to the House.
So let's bring in Isaac Wright, former executive director of Correct the Record, a pro-Clinton super PAC in the 2016 election, and John Hart, former communications director for Senator Tom Coburn. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
So, John, I'll start with you. The president met with senators for lunch this afternoon, and he's hopeful about moving forward with this plan and getting some details from the Senate. How hopeful are you?
Well, I'm very hopeful. I think what the Senate GOP is going to do is reset the debate. Look, the country knows that Republicans don't like Obamacare. The president did a good job of walking through why the plan has failed. And we have to define what we're for as Republicans. And the truth is Republicans have had plans for 8 years. Tom Coburn worked on one with Paul Ryan. The House has put forward a plan, obviously. But Republicans have to define what we're for. And what we're for is that we want everyone to have great health care, but the government can't be in charge. You, the individual, should be in charge. And by moving towards a patient-centered system, we'll be able to provide care for everybody in a way that's much more efficient than having the government have a top-down micromanaging approach from Washington.
Well, John, since you mentioned it, let's take a listen as to what the president had to say about what went wrong with Obamacare, and then, Isaac, I'll let you respond to it.
As soon as we can do it. As soon as we can do it. Obamacare has been broken, and it's been a broken promise. One after another, Americans were told that if you liked your doctor, you'll keep your doctor. That was a lie. They were told that if you liked your plan, you'd keep your plan. That was a lie. Americans were told the premiums would go down by $2,500 per year, and instead their premiums went up to levels that nobody thought even possible. The House has passed a bill, and now the Senate is working very, very hard, and specifically the folks in this room, and I really appreciate what you're doing, to come out with a bill that's going to be a phenomenal bill for the people of our country.
And the first part of that sound there, he was answering, you know, how soon do you think that will happen? And he said as quickly as possible. So, Isaac, what do you think about that? I mean, some of the premiums that he talked about, I was really shocked. Alaska, the premiums have risen 203%. So how do you answer that?
I think it's so scary that President Trump has proposed a plan, that the House has passed a bill, that the Senate is now working in secret to try to further a bill that's going to drive premiums up even further. 85% of Americans covered under Obamacare receive tax credits that offset those insurance premiums. So people are paying less for their health care, even if the premium's going up. And Trump Care passed through the House, that's now supported in the Senate by Republicans, at least from what we can tell since they're negotiating in secret, also does away with those premiums.
But why have 2 million people dropped out? Those are the latest numbers in terms of Obamacare.
Because in the last few weeks, the CEOs of so many insurance companies are pulling out and raising these premiums because they say they are unsure and uncertain of the future of health care because of Trump's decision and the Trump administration and this Republican legislation. That's been openly commented on by healthcare CEOs. It is essentially a sabotage of the system that President Obama set up that was passed with public scrutiny to reform healthcare. We should be looking at how we work under the hood to tweak Obamacare and make it better. That's what Democrats have proposed. How to improve the healthcare exchanges and improve those marketplaces instead of doing away with it, taking insurance away from 23 million Americans and increasing premiums for seniors and working people, putting lifetime caps on health care through Medicaid.
Let me let John jump in here and answer some of that, because there has been critique that there haven't been open and public discussions about what's being done behind the scenes.
Well, okay, three quick points. Number one is Obamacare was in a death spiral before the election. That's why Hillary Clinton lost.
Not true.
It had nothing to do with the Russians. It was because premiums were going up 25%. So her support with their base declined significantly because of that. In terms of costs and premiums, the president was right. Obama said, if you're a family, your costs will go down $2,500. Instead, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, costs went up over $4,300. So that's a $6,800 swing. That's enough to buy a second car, to cover a mortgage for a lower middle-income family. And then third, if Democrats have a plan, show us what your plan is. You know, partisanship is not a plan. Where's Bernie Sanders' plan?
We have a plan. We have a plan. We passed it. We have a plan.
And it's failing.
We passed it under last administration. That's not true. And that's the thing. John's repeating a Republican talking point that he knows good and well has been debunked over and over and again. Literally, the Associated Press had a headline that said, a month ago, that said Obamacare was not in a death spiral. This has been widely debunked by every bipartisan foundation that has looked into it. It's just not true. The problems that have come up in the last few weeks have been openly admitted that CEOs of these health insurance companies are saying, yes, in the last few weeks, they're hiking these things. They're pulling out of exchanges because of the uncertainty of Trump and the Republican Congress. Let's just be honest with the viewers.
Yes, let's be honest that coming up, hopefully we'll hear a plan that is coming out of the House or out of the Senate, and moving forward, it'll be a good plan for Americans. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, is having a busy day after a high-stakes meeting with some key allies. Can he solve a diplomatic crisis over the nation of Qatar? Plus, the Secretary confirms the release of an American prisoner sentenced to 15 years of hard labor in North Korea. A live report on the young man who is reportedly now in a coma. And we are awaiting Jeff Sessions' testimony in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee, the same committee that heard from James Comey, the fired FBI director, last week. Fireworks ahead about an hour from now on Capitol Hill.
News alert for you. Busy day on Capitol Hill as we await Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who is preparing to testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee next hour. And of course, earlier today, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein testifying before a Senate Appropriations Subcommittee. Let's bring in our political panel. Monique Presley, attorney and Democratic commentator, and Lawrence Jones, radio host for the Lawrence Jones Show on Blaze TV and conservative commentator. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm sure you both listened to what Rod Rosenstein had to say earlier today. He made it clear. He said he was asked, has the president talked about a special counsel with you? He said no. He was asked, is there a secret plan to remove the special counsel? And he says no, no secret plan that involves me. So your response to that first, Lawrence?
Well, he also said, Heather, that he would be the man doing the firing. And so what we see now is that this is just media speculation. These are sources, unnamed sources, that they continue to do with this administration. And now we figure out that this is another nothing burger.
Yeah, and Monique, not only that, the White House has said they didn't say this. They didn't say that there was a possibility of Mueller being fired.
Well, listen, I don't believe in trafficking in rumors. We have to traffic in facts. The difficulty is that with this president, you never know when what's in the rumor mill is actually a fact or about to be revealed as a fact. So just because Mr. Rosenstein might be the last to know doesn't mean that something's not about to happen. We've seen it at this point too many times before.
Lawrence, the president, by the way, was cleared by the investigation, and a lot of people don't seem to be remembering that part of what James Comey had to say.
Look, I think that's a fair point, Heather. The president was clear 3 times on multiple occasions by the FBI director. He was cleared in Congress because Congress knew all along that he didn't do anything wrong. But I think the president has to be cautious because he's so loyal. And I've pressured many people that are advisors to tell the president to let Flynn go. We don't know what's there, but the president needs to focus on the country. Whatever investigation happens with Russia concerning Flynn or Manafort, the president shouldn't be involved. He shouldn't be talking with the AG, although he has the authority to do so. But because of optics, he should let it go.
Again,
do you agree?
Well, let's back up for a minute. I'm confused by the last 2 statements. Director Comey didn't testify that the president was cleared. Director Comey testified that he, at 3 points, informed the president that he was not under investigation at that time. That,
there's no investigation.
As a former prosecutor and as a former person who worked in an attorney general's office, I can tell you that if you're investigating everyone underneath the principal, that doesn't mean that the principal isn't going to become a part of that investigation at some point in the future, and there most certainly is an investigation into possible collusion.
Can I ask you a question? I've actually asked several other people, in fact, today, Monique, since you bring that up, other people brought into the investigation. Do you think that James Comey should be brought up under investigation and that he's now publicly admitted that he leaked his memos himself in order to get a special counsel appointed?
No, I think that in order to call something a leak, it has to be something that's classified, because otherwise you're not leaking, you're sharing. And I'm not finished. And if you're going to spend time investigating, then you have to investigate things that are crimes. And Director Comey did not commit one.
Lawrence?
He shared a government document from a government laptop in his car. He leaked the information. He's a leaker. And all along, we've been having questions concerning the FBI. Why are there so many leaks? Well, we know now, because their leader is a leaker, and that's a problem.
And if you're willing to spend time, if you're willing to spend time investigating leaks, you ought to be twice as willing to spend time investigating the underlying facts and information. That's what the American people care about. That's what voters care about. They don't care more about how they found out information. They care about whether it's true.
Yeah, you know what else I think they care about? They do care about our infrastructure. They care about our health care. They care about tax cuts, and we're not getting to any of that because we're talking about all this.
Tell the president.
Thank you for joining us.
All right.
Thanks, Heather.
Bye-bye.
A Fox News alert, we're getting some brand new details on the release of an American imprisoned by North Korea in what has been a very busy day for Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. Not long ago, he wrapped up his testimony on the State Department budget after a meeting with the Saudi foreign minister on the diplomatic crisis over Qatar. Rich Edson is live from the State Department. He has the latest for us. Rich.
Good afternoon, John. And we're learning new details on how the State Department secured the release of Otto Warmbier, the 23-year-old college student held captive in North Korea. A State Department official says they first learned of Warmbier's condition, that he was in a coma 1 week ago, in conversations that they had had with North Korea's representatives to the United Nations. State Department officials says that the United States decided to send a medical team to Pyongyang. Yesterday, that medical team evaluated Warmbier, determined he was in a coma, and then he was on a plane today back to Ohio. The college student from Ohio was arrested for allegedly stealing a propaganda poster in January of 2016. 2 months later, he was sentenced to 15 years in jail. The State Department has put out an official statement on this, saying it refuses to comment on his condition. Now, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson led off his first congressional hearing of the day, mentioning Warmbier's release. Tillerson appeared before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where a bipartisan group of senators have also pushed a strong Russia sanctions bill that aides say would severely limit the administration's ability to roll back existing sanctions against Russia. Tillerson refused to endorse that bill.
We would like is the flexibility to turn that heat up when we sense that our efforts with Russia, whether it be in Syria, we have engagements that they have asked for us to engage with them on Ukraine. So we have some channels that are open where we're starting to talk, and I think what I wouldn't want to do is close the channels off.
Senators like McCain, Graham, Portman, Cardin, according to congressional aides, all pushed for the stronger sanctions measure. Congressional Republicans were saying that they wanted to set a barrier, assert themselves in Russia policy, that the U.S. continued to maintain a strong policy against the regime of Vladimir Putin in Russia. The day all began for Secretary of State Rex Tillerson here at the State Department, meeting with the Saudi foreign minister as Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and others have severed diplomatic ties with Qatar. State Department officials say Tillerson has been working both sides of that impasse, speaking with nearly a dozen officials throughout the region to try to get a breakthrough, though it doesn't seem as though that diplomatic crisis is any closer today to ending, at least as it was yesterday. John.
And a lot more to come about what happened in North Korea to Otto Warmbier. That's a very sad story. Rich Edson, thank you.
Well, still to come, Capitol Hill lawmakers gearing up for more dramatic testimony. We've been telling you as Attorney General Jeff Sessions takes questions in an open session less than an hour from now from the same committee where former FBI Director James Comey appeared less than a week ago. What will Sessions say about Comey's dismissal and the Russia investigation? Greg Jarrett.
Alert on Attorney General Jeff Sessions' upcoming testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee. It comes on the same day his deputy attorney general faced lawmakers at another hearing on Capitol Hill, and less than a week after former FBI Director James Comey testified about his own firing.
I think it's a reasonable question. If, as the president said, I was fired because of the Russia investigation, why was the attorney general involved in that chain? I don't know, and so I don't have an answer for the question.
Joining us now, Greg Jarrett, a Fox News anchor and attorney. So James Comey doesn't know about why Sessions was involved, but will the senators? Is that what they're going to be asking about?
Yeah, it's a very tricky thing for Sessions to answer the question. He probably won't talk about his conversations with the president. It's privilege. You give advice or talk about national security, i.e. Russia, that's privileged. So Sessions has to be very careful here. He'd probably decline to answer. Senators would then have to move to compel him to answer. The president would invoke executive privilege. Then it gets bogged down in the court system for a couple of years. So I would expect Sessions to walk a very narrow line here and simply say, as to the firing of Comey, it was based entirely upon his mishandling of the Hillary Clinton email scandal and nothing more.
So when it comes to his testimony today, do you see this as a risk for him or an opportunity?
Well, I think it's a big opportunity to clear his name and to refute the allegations that he lied to Congress at his confirmation hearing. You have to remember the question that was posed in context. Senator Al Franken was saying there's a report that Trump surrogates exchanged information with Russians. What do you know about that? And Sessions answered this way: I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians. So you see, he'll argue, I was talking as a surrogate of the Trump campaign, not as a U.S. Senator on the Armed Services Committee, who would obviously normally be talking with Russian officials.
And what about his earlier meetings with Russian officials, the ambassador, et cetera?
Well, the same argument applies. You go back to the fall meeting with the Russian ambassador to the U.S., Kislyak. It was set up, apparently, by the Obama administration. So there's nothing nefarious about that, and a couple of his staff members sat in on it. There was an April, apparently, encounter with Kislyak, but Sessions has issued a statement saying we didn't speak. And, you know, a meeting in which you talk is different than a chance encounter at a reception.
So is he going to contradict what James Comey had to say last week?
Well, I suspect he will, and he may take the opportunity to trash Comey the way Comey trashed the president. In particular, Comey testified that he went to Sessions and said, you can't leave me alone with the president. And Comey said Sessions just stood there and said nothing. Well, hours after Comey testified, DOJ sent out a statement that said as follows: he, Sessions, responded to this comment by saying the FBI and DOJ needed to be careful about following appropriate policies regarding contacts with the White House. So Sessions is going to rip Comey for not telling the truth in his testimony, and may also suggest he was lying when he denied receiving Sessions' recusal by memo and the parameters of the recusal. If that is true, Comey is looking at legal jeopardy.
Greg Jarrett.